Hello and welcome back to the Poultry Network podcast. My name is Tom Woolman.
And I'm Tom Willings.
And joining us this week, we've got the RSPCA, or to be more specific, we've got two people from the RSPCA because we wanted to talk about the new laying hen standards, which are out. So joining us today, we've got Kelly Grellier, who's the Chief Commercial Officer for RSPCA Assured. And we've also got Kate Parks, Section Manager and Pig and Poultry Expert for the RSPCA. So welcome both to the Poultry Network podcast.
Thank you.
Good to see you both.
And great to be here. Thanks.
We were just thinking this is the first time that we've had four people on the podcast, so we're interested to see how it goes. And if we're all talking over each other, it must mean that either that's a very good thing or probably quite a bad thing for the listener. But give a nod and a wink if you want to say something. So I just wondered if we could start, Kelly and Kate, on understanding the relationship between the RSPCA as the organisation and RSPCA Assured. What are their roles? How do they work together? Who'd like to start with that?
Yeah. Thanks, Tom. So obviously at the RSPCA, we've been working for over 200 years now, trying to improve farm animal welfare, and been working over the last 30 with our colleagues in RSPCA Assured. But we do have slightly different roles in terms of kind of our day-to-day working. So in the RSPCA, one of our main roles is to actually write the welfare standards. So they're the ones that get used by RSPCA Assured. So we'll be the ones looking at sort of the evidence base for it, consulting, working out where we're going to set those standards, as well as our more broad work in terms of feeding into sort of campaigns or lobbying work.
And how does scientific research then feed into those standards?
Yeah, well, to be honest, Kelly, go ahead.
You might want me to talk about RSPCA Assured as well at some point, but we can come back.
Go finish that question then. Talk about RSPCA Assured and how that fits in then.
So RSPCA Assured, we work really closely with our colleagues in RSPCA as the standards are being developed, so that we can share feedback from our members on the sort of practical considerations. We also have a farm and technical engagement team who support the implementation of the standards, sharing best practice, sharing examples across our members to help people sort of know what's working well for others. We've got a really highly experienced team of assessors as well. So we then are also carrying out annual sort of member assessments to make sure that actually what the standards are being delivered in practice, and that consumers can be confident that the standards and the quality of life for the animals that are RSPCA Assured. And we also market as well. So you will have seen this year, we focused on laying hens actually in our marketing to really help consumers understand that when they're choosing RSPCA Assured and they see the logo, that those animals have had a good life. So we kind of cover that broad spectrum.
Okay. And so that brings me back again to scientific evidence and scientific evidence of what a inverted commas good life is. How do you go about assessing that then, Kate?
Yes, so we use lots of different aspects in terms of science to inform what we're doing. And that's not just in terms of developing the standards, but it's also in terms of our sort of policy work generally. So we look at lots of different sources. Our kind of gold standard, for want of a better phrase, would be that kind of peer-reviewed scientific research, just because of the robustness and the independence of it. But we're looking at other sources of evidence as well. So it could be, say, robust farm trial data. It could be sort of welfare outcome assessment type data, reports from respected bodies, whether that's veterinary, scientific academia type bodies. So those are all the different sort of, I suppose, areas of evidence that we'd look at, but it's not just where it comes from. It is that kind of robustness and integrity, because we want to make sure that when we're drawing conclusions about what we're putting in the standards, we can be confident in that. So we'd also looking at are there a number of studies that say the same thing? where has it come from? Is it that kind of scientific side versus more of a sort of, farm trial? So all that kind of goes into the pot in terms of consideration. And then we also bring in that more practical side in terms of, okay, this is where science is leading us. This is where science is saying we should kind of be pitching, whether it's standards or whatever, our recommendations. And then we have those discussions about, well, how can we put that into practice? What are there any practical constraints, considerations that we need to factor in as well? So we're getting that kind of rounded view in terms of all the different sort of stakeholders' views that we can have a think about before we might be developing standards.
Kate, can I ask, you guys have been on farm, auditing on farm, gathering farm data directly through your assessors for a number of years. How big a pot of data have you got? What sort of stuff have you got data on? And then how is that data formed part of your kind of progression of the standards, if at all?
Yeah, so I might hand over to Kelly on this one, but generally, yeah, you're right. When we're talking about laying hens, we've been collecting data on sort of feather cover, the behaviour of the flock, and you're right. I think, goodness, probably going on for 10 years now. We've been collecting this data, and that is part of the actual standards. The standards require that to be recorded, and it is our assessors that go out and do that as part of their process.
But I understand it's part of the process. It's a requirement to gather that information. My question is, does that information and has that information informed how your policies have matured over time?
Yeah, unfortunately, to date, we haven't been able to delve down into that level of detail in the data. But certainly that is something that we want to do going forwards. We'd like to be able to take that data and say, oh, okay, it's, most of our farms are performing really well in X area, but in Y, maybe we need to look at that, whether that's in terms of, are the standards where they should be? Do we need to make some tweaks? Or is there a bit more sort of interaction with producers? But Kelly can cover this in a bit more detail.
Yeah, and just to say, we've invested in the team. So we now have our Impact and Insights team, which reports directly to our executive director and has the welfare outcomes team within that, so that we can really kind of boost and sort of supercharge, if you like, that area of our organisation to really help not just inform the standards, but also make that really available and more transparent in a benchmarking type way for our members. So that is something that we're going to be working on going forward. So watch this space. Hopefully we can come back another time and tell you about it.
Yeah, that would be great. I was just thinking, your team on the ground would have seen more farms than anybody else, any other working group. You've got more than 50%, I think you mentioned before we went on air, as it were, before we started recording. More than 50% of the birds in the country are under the scheme, and of course, if they're being inspected regularly, then you'll have a great handle on how different elements of the housing system or the conditions, environmental conditions on the farm at the point that you're visiting, play into the measurable welfare outcomes or any other statistic that you're looking to record. And so I was curious to understand how that helped you shape what good looks like, so that you can make informed decisions about standards in the future. But you've answered my question. I think the next natural question I want to ask is about the STAG committee, which is the Standards Technical Advisory Group. Is that right? Have I got that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
And that still exists. Is that correct?
Yes, we have a similar group, I suppose, for all our species or standards. So yes, we do still have one for laying hens, separate one for pullets, because whilst similar issues, there are different things we discuss. So yeah, the meeting of that group generally happens formally at least once a year, but we have interim meetings. But we did pause that once the standards had been released, just because we felt we wanted to engage more, and it just felt right to pause that at that moment. But we are looking to reconvene that group going forwards.
Were they then part of the original, I say original, but I'm referring to the 23 iteration of the revised standards? Was that STAG group central to creating those revisions?
Yeah, so with any set of standards, we have a sort of set process that we follow. So in terms of that particular set of standards, we first started talking about natural daylight and verandas and these other issues way back actually in 2021. And we went through a process of, discussing with the STAG, refining afterwards, going out, gathering more data where we needed to, going on farm visits, for example, consulting with building manufacturers, etc., to get more detailed information. So throughout that process, we did make amendments, make revisions. So, but that is the process we would follow for any species standard. It wasn't unique to laying hens.
I know a lot of the feedback in the industry is very, the whole feedback loop is nuanced. You get a lot of noise from a very small number of people. The majority of the noise comes from people who feel a certain way or have a particular view, and it doesn't necessarily reflect the whole. I understand that. But I wonder whether or not you look at that STAG group as an advisory group, and maybe there are others as well, that represent the practical side of industry. And I wonder whether or not you reflect on the constitution of that group and who should be on it, and what would you say to members about how it's formed and where you get advice?
Yeah, I can totally understand that question, and I think we do have a good representation on there. Can things be improved? Absolutely. And we do, I suppose, with all of them, take stock from time to time in terms of, have we got the right people on there? And by that, I mean, are we, as you say, have we got the representation we need? And that could be in terms of, businesses, if we're talking about the producer side, business size, geographic location, types of systems that they have. So we're definitely reflecting on that in terms of its membership, and just making sure that we do have kind of that broad representation. But it isn't just, I suppose, that producer side that we engage with on that STAG. We do also have, people from academic research, industry, species specific vets, to try and get that rounded picture. But definitely the voice of the producer is important in that group, hence why we will look at the membership going forwards.
And we and just to sort of build on that, the sort of post-release, post November 23, sort of recognising that we wanted to kind of get the voice of some more producers in and understand the issues that they were raising, which there were 14 in total, and understand how we achieve that welfare outcome that we want to drive forward, whilst mitigating the sort of concerns that they had on a practical basis. So we set up a working group which had representatives actually from the STAG, as well as producers from each of the regions across the UK, 2 producers per region. And we met monthly for over 12 months actually, and worked systematically on the issues that they had raised. And it was really good. It was practical. We they identified the issues. We talked about what welfare outcomes we were trying to achieve, and then for a lot of it, it was about clarifying actually and being a bit clearer in the wording in the standard. And then there was just sort of less than a handful, which we really needed to look at. Okay, well, how do we achieve this welfare goal? And sort of shift and revise the standard to make it the sort of implementation of it more practical for producers. So we intend going forward to work in a more collaborative sort of way to augment that STAG process, which is really important in terms of that scientific base.
Thanks, Kelly.
If you forgive me for drawing parallels, I sometimes it's made me smile because I was thinking about the new Labour government elected last year, and on a mandate of change, and some of the challenges that they've had, in terms of, well, we know where we want to get to, but in terms of the actual nuts and bolts of getting there, you've got to go through a process of consultation, haven't you, sometimes, and revision, and and again, apologies for maybe drawing that that connection, but I think when you're looking at change, it's difficult to get right, isn't it? And it's worth taking the time to fully consult with as many stakeholders as possible.
Beyond being worth taking time, there are 2 reviews out in the ether. One, the DEFRA fairness in the supply chain review, and the other, I think, is backed by NFU, the farm assurance review, both of which would place consultation with membership, at a practical level, front and centre in just the way these things should be conducted. And I guess, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would imagine that those documents and the feedback from those processes must shape how you would implement change in the future.
And we welcomed those, and when we sort of the AHDB sort of NFU document, actually there were a number of areas that we were already working on as sort of two organisations. We were already obviously working on this much more kind of sort of broader collaborative sort of approach to get that feedback and sort of and inform how we work going forward. But also from a kind of scheme integrity perspective, we've done an independent review of the scheme following the sort of events of last year with activism, and have got a really great report which talks to the integrity of the scheme as that sort of foundational baseline. So we've got some really good sort of foundations to move forward, and we're working on that kind of iterative continuous improvement based on sort of our own findings and findings from those external reports as well.
I'm conscious of time, and I want to move now into kind of forward-looking stuff, because laying hen standards, we've gone from November 23 to now, beyond the implementation date of, I think it was the 11th of July 25. So we've, through a period of discussion with industry, reached a point, and you're now assessing against those standards. But looking then further down the track, what's next? How should, or rather, what should producers, farmers at large, expect in terms of timescale and subject for further reviews?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and I think so. We work on a 2-year standard cycle. Generally, obviously, there's been a bit of delay with some of the species in recent years, but that's what we're aiming for. So we would envisage the next version of the laying hen standards coming out in 2027. To be honest, it's probably a little bit early to go into any detail in terms of what might be in that, partly because obviously we're just starting those sort of discussions and those looking into those areas. I think what I can say though is, the standards, we do have throughout the standards information boxes that they do 3 things actually. One is just provide more information. One is to kind of signal an aspiration which is quite far in the future, and others do signal things that we are potentially looking at. That's not to say they're coming in the next version necessarily, but they are sort of our key areas that we're looking to drive forward. So there are areas within that we're hoping to look at going forwards. But as always, it is that consultation process that we will be going through. So in terms of, as I say, we're just starting now. We'll be looking to engage with people on those topics to kind of, gather that information, whether it's the latest science or that, sort of practical feedback. So, given we have had some quite major changes in the latest version, we don't envisage a similar level of change in the next one.
You think the heavy lifting was done in this latest version, and it'll be you mentioned continuous improvement, tweaks.
It's I can't say for definite because I haven't started that work, but I think it's highly likely to be more on those smaller tweaks, if that makes sense. Whilst we're probably scurrying around in the background, having those discussions about those more medium to longer term aspirations or changes that we want to put into place.
So if I could ask a question about those producers that are out there and looking at the standards now and are thinking, right, well, I'd be quite keen to engage and help feed into the future work that you're doing. How are they best to do that?
So I was just going to say, we're going to continue to work in that collaborative, integrated way. The working group that we set up is meeting in September, and it's really exciting that we'll be meeting up and not talking about the 2026 standards, but starting to have conversations about how they're landing, how they're working in practice, but also the sort of questions about the things, aspirations in the information box. I guess what's critical to say is that is, as I said earlier, augments the STAG process. It's not in any way replacing it. It's about how we gather that information and think with industry how's the best way to sort of answer their questions and sort of feed into that process. But Kate, do you want to?
I was going to say, I think as well, we've got the new team in RSPCA Assured, the farming and technical engagement team, that can be contacted anytime, as we can as standard setter, if members have a particular issue or want to raise anything with us. We've got the assessors on the ground day to day, and they're hugely valuable in feeding back information to us, and we're looking at ways to kind of improve that two-way flow of information between us and assessors. So I think there's lots of opportunities to get that feedback, and I'd say we do have a lot of information as well on both our and RSPCA Assured's website in terms of what we're doing. I'm not sure a lot of people know that. So for example, we do publish what we call summary notes of our meetings. So anyone can go on and see, not in detail, but what kind of topics we're discussing to get that kind of flavour of areas we're looking at into the future. So, yeah, I'd say people to get in contact with us, definitely.
Can I ask a question about the supermarkets? The RSPCA Assured label, of course, has got great recognition with public, and it is used as a it's there to protect reputation of the retailers whose products carry your trademark. What part, therefore, do the supermarkets themselves and the technical people within the agricultural divisions in supermarkets play in shaping, the standards in each species?
So we they're not on the STAG group, but we have a relationship. So my team in RSPCA Assured, and they have direct relationships with sort of the team that Kate's in as well. But we work really closely with our sort of retail partners, we would call them, and have relationships with people in all sorts of roles, actually, including the sort of technical agricultural roles with those retail partners. We have engaged them over the sort of past few months, but plan to engage them even more, and have created a new team actually in RSPCA Assured who are all about actually engaging proactively on with our retailers on the sort of future sort of welfare ambitions, and understanding where that fits with their own strategies as well, and how we engage them in these sort of processes in a more collaborative way. But the standards will always be independently set. That's important. What we're gathering is sort of input into the setting of those standards.
And I think the standards being set independently is to everybody's benefit and is wholly right. I think. And it's only an observation, but I think on a farmer would take a great deal of comfort in understanding that the ultimate customer, the supermarket, who's going to be the one that determines the value of the produce that they are creating on the farm, that they are invested in your standards, such that they can actually be paid for whatever on cost that might come as a result of implementing those standards, and especially so if the standards are going to continue to be more stretching and require kind of capital investment or OPEX, then even more important that the farmers can be comforted that the market recognises, values, and even requests or instructs those changes.
Yeah, because all standards have got to be commercially viable, haven't they? They've got to communicate something to a customer that means that customer is willing to pay for it, and it's also got to work for the farmer with what they're being asked to do, and being able to invest in their site. Yeah,
you put it so much better than I did, Tom. That's exactly right.
That's why there's two of us, isn't there?
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Kate, for coming along and talking to us today and shedding a little bit of light on the laying hen standards. Worth noting as well, there are new broiler standards out as well. So if you're a broiler farmer listening to this, doing RSPCA Assured birds, then look those up as well. But yeah, it just remains for me to say thank you for coming along again, and all the best.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.